The obese virgin was sold for pennies at auction, until the Duke paid gold and said, "She's mine." Dust swirls in a lonely frontier square. A jeering crowd gathers as a heavy-set woman is pushed onto the wooden block, her shame sold. For less than a loaf of bread. The auctioneer's hammer falls until a stranger steps forward. A purse of gold slams into the dirt. His voice cuts through the noise. "She's mine, but in this town nothing is simple." Whispers spread that the foreign noble wants more than just her hand, that hidden papers may hold the fate of every farm, every drop of water, every family's survival. If he speaks truth, she could save them all. But if he lies, she will lose everything, her land, her honor, and her heart. Did he pay gold to free her, or to claim the land beneath her? Feet, drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The summer sun beat down on the frontier market square, its harsh rays offering no mercy to Mary Beth Carter as her uncle's iron grip propelled her toward the wooden platform. Her faded blue gown, stretched tight across her fuller figure, had seen better days, much like her family's fortunes. The worn fabric pulled at the seams, a testament to years of making do with what little she had. "Come along, girl," Uncle Silas growled, yanking her arm. "Time to be rid of you and get something for my trouble these past years." Mary Beth's throat tightened as her shoes scuffed against the rough wooden steps. The platform, usually reserved for selling cattle and farm equipment, now displayed her like common goods. Market day crowds gathered, their familiar faces twisted with cruel amusement. "Well, well," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the square. "What have we here? The last unsold virgin of Carter blood." He circled Mary Beth like a vulture, gesturing dramatically. "A bit more to love than your average maid, but that means more to warm your bed come winter." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mary Beth fixed her gaze on the distant church spire, trying to hold on to her dignity even as shame burned her cheeks. She thought of her father's law books, still hidden in her trunk, how far she had fallen from the days when she helped him with his correspondence. "Do I hear an opening bid?" The auctioneer called, striking his stick against the platform. "2 pennies," shouted a weather-beaten farmer, causing more laughter. "A day-old loaf," called another. "Come now," the auctioneer grinned. "Surely she's worth at least a fresh one." Uncle Silas's fingers dug deeper into Mary Beth's arm. She could smell the morning's ale on his breath as he muttered, "Ungrateful chit. Should have sent you to the workhouse years ago." 3 pennies. Came another call, followed by cruel jokes about her size. Mary Beth's eyes stung, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She thought of her mother's last words. "Keep your heart strong, my dear. Your worth isn't measured by others' cruel words." The auctioneer was about to bring down his stick. 3 pennies going once. That's quite enough." The voice cut through the jeers like a sword through silk. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure in noble clothing that had seen better days. His coat was of fine cut but worn at the edges, his boots polished but with old scuffs. He moved with the easy grace of the gentry, though something about him spoke of harder times. Before anyone could speak, he tossed a heavy purse onto the platform. The sound of clinking gold silenced every voice in the square. The auctioneer scrambled to open it, his eyes widening at the contents. "She is mine," the stranger declared, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that brooked no argument. There was neither mockery nor pity in his tone, only calm certainty. The auctioneer gaped at the gold, then at the stranger, then at Mary Beth. "My ... My lord, surely you don't mean to, I believe." The stranger cut in smoothly. "That sum more than covers any price you might have hoped for." He extended his hand toward the platform. "Come, Miss Carter." Uncle Silas's grip loosened in shock. The auctioneer, still stammering, helped Mary Beth down from the platform. Her legs trembled so badly she nearly missed the last step, but strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. The stranger's broad shoulders blocked the gawking crowd from view as he guided her away from the platform. Mary Beth caught the scent of leather and horses, felt the gentle strength in his supporting grip. The jeering crowd fell silent. Their entertainment turned to shock as the mysterious nobleman led their intended victim away. "Breathe, Miss Carter," he murmured, so softly only she could hear. "You're safe now." Mary Beth's heart pounded as she glanced up at her rescuer's face, still unable to believe this wasn't some cruel jest. But his eyes, when they met hers, held no mockery, only a quiet understanding that made her wonder who this man could be and why he had chosen to save her from such a public humiliation. The Duke's firm but gentle grip guided Mary Beth through the murmuring crowd. Her cheeks burned as neighbors and townspeople she'd known all her life parted before them, their whispers sharp as needles against her skin. The stranger's presence beside her felt both threatening and protective, a contradiction that made her heart flutter with uncertainty. A polished black carriage waited at the edge of the square, its matching pair of bay horses stamping impatiently. The driver, straight-backed and proper, opened the door with a slight bow. "Your Grace." Those two simple words sent a ripple through the watching crowd. Mary Beth's breath caught in her throat. "Your Grace?" This man who'd bought her like a head of cattle was not merely wealthy, but titled. The Duke helped her into the carriage with practiced courtesy, his hand steady and proper. Once settled across from her, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples. "I must apologize for my dramatic intervention, Miss Carter. I could not stand idle while they stripped away your dignity in such a fashion." His cultured accent confirmed what his bearing had suggested. This was indeed a nobleman, far from his proper sphere. Mary Beth studied him warily, searching for signs of mockery or ulterior motives in his expression. Why would a duke concern himself with a country nobody's shame? Because no lady deserves such treatment, regardless of her station. His voice was firm but kind. "I am Alistair, Duke of Rothmere, and I assure you my intentions are honorable." The carriage rolled toward the town's only inn, but already Mary Beth could see people hurrying ahead of them, no doubt spreading word of the morning's events. Within hours, everyone would know that foreign nobility had purchased the plain, plump Carter girl. The inn's common room fell silent as they entered, dozens of eyes following their progress to a private table. They had barely been served their tea when heavy boots announced the sheriff's arrival. Abel Turner's weather-worn face was stern as he approached their table, hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. "Your Grace," he said, the title dripping with skepticism. "We don't cotton to human trafficking in this town, noble or not. No man can buy a woman like property, not here." The Duke set down his teacup with perfect composure. "You are absolutely correct, Sheriff Turner, which is why I intend to obtain a special license for marriage immediately." Mary Beth nearly choked on her tea. "Marriage? In name only, Alistair," assured her quickly, his eyes kind but serious. "To protect your reputation from the unfortunate circumstances of our meeting. Unless the banns are read, which would require several weeks of waiting. The sheriff's suspicious glare didn't waver. "And why would a duke marry so far beneath his station?" "Because sometimes, Sheriff, doing what is right matters more than doing what is expected." Alistair's voice carried quiet authority. "Miss Carter's situation required immediate intervention. I have the means and position to offer her protection. Through marriage. The choice, of course," he added, turning to Mary Beth, "is entirely yours." Evening shadows lengthened across the inn's common room as Mary Beth's hands trembled around her cup. Candlelight flickered across the Duke's aristocratic features as he calmly discussed marriage licenses and legal requirements with the still suspicious sheriff. The gravity of the situation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight. A marriage of convenience to a duke? It seemed impossible, like something from one of the romantic novels she kept hidden under her bed. Yet here he sat, this noble stranger, offering her a way out of her uncle's tyranny with seemingly no expectation of anything. She studied him in the wavering candlelight, trying to understand. His clothes, though clearly of fine make, showed signs of travel and wear. There was a story there, she was certain. Why would a duke be so far from his proper sphere, interfering in the affairs of frontier townsfolk? Sheriff Turner's deep voice cut through her thoughts. "I'll be watching this situation closely, Your Grace, very closely indeed." The first rays of dawn crept through the inn's clouded window, painting pale strips across Mary Beth's borrowed chamber floor. She hadn't slept well, her mind churning with the previous day's events. The rough voices of early risers drifted up from the street below. "Did you hear? That fat Carter girl's to be Lady Rothmere now." A shrill female voice carried clearly through the thin glass. "A duke, no less," another answered with a laugh. "Though I'd wager he's some foreign fraud. No proper noble'd want her." Mary Beth's fingers clenched in the rough wool blanket. The words stung, but she'd grown used to such barbs over the years. What truly troubled her was the uncertainty of her situation. This stranger, this duke, had saved her from public humiliation. Yet his motives remained as mysterious as the man himself. A gentle knock at her door announced the duke himself. "Miss Carter? If you're ready, we should collect your belongings before the day grows too warm." The walk to her uncle's farm stretched before them, morning mist still clinging to the meadow grass. Alistair matched his long stride to her shorter one, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow made her feel both grateful and oddly disappointed. "Your uncle," he said carefully. "I trust he treated your possessions with care?" Mary Beth couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her. "Uncle Silas cares only for what might bring him profit. I doubt he's touched anything of mine since." She stopped herself, unwilling to speak of yesterday's degradation. The farmhouse looked smaller somehow, its weather-worn boards gray in the morning light. Uncle Silas was nowhere to be seen, probably nursing his hangover at the tavern after spending his blood money. "My chamber's in the loft," Mary Beth said, leading the way inside. The familiar creak of the ladder rungs brought back memories of climbing up and down as a child, when this had been her father's prosperous home rather than her prison. The loft was stuffy and dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shaft of light from the window. Her few dresses and books were quickly gathered, but something caught her eye in the far corner, a cedar chest she hadn't seen in years, its brass fittings dull with age. "My father's dowry chest," she breathed, moving toward it. "I thought Uncle Silas had sold it with everything else." The lid opened with a protesting groan, releasing the sweet scent of cedar. Inside, beneath a moth-eaten shawl that had been her mother's, lay a stack of yellowed papers tied with faded ribbon. Alistair stepped closer, his expression sharpening as he spotted the official seal. "These are land grants," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Mary Beth's hands trembled as she unfolded the brittle pages. "Father's pride and joy, the water rights to Willow Creek, and all the fertile bottom land." She traced the flowing script of her father's name. "He always said it would be my inheritance, my security." She noticed Alistair studying the documents with intense interest, his aristocratic features thoughtful. Something cold settled in her stomach as whispered fragments of conversation from the street below drifted back to her. "Foreign noble ... land rights ... double quotes. No proper duke would want her ... The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity and growing dread. Every sideways glance from townspeople, every whispered conversation that stopped when she approached, seemed to confirm her fears. By nightfall, the whole town was buzzing with speculation about the foreign duke who'd swooped in to claim both the unwanted Carter girl and her valuable land rights. Now, alone in her chamber at the inn, Mary Beth sat at the small table, watching. Her candle burned lower as she studied the land grant. The official seal caught the flickering light, seeming to mock her with its importance. Her father's careful signature blurred as tears threatened. "Is this why he came for me?" she whispered to the empty room, her heart aching with fresh betrayal. The marriage to a foreigner could void her claim to the land, the very land her father had worked so hard to secure for their people's future. Was she about to lose everything to a stranger's clever scheme? The land grant seemed to weigh as heavy as her fears in her trembling hands as she whispered again, "Is this why he came for me?" A gentle knock stirred Mary Beth from her troubled thoughts. "Miss Carter?" Alistair's refined voice carried through the wooden door. "I wondered if you might accompany me to church services this morning." Mary Beth smoothed her faded dress, heart fluttering. "One moment, Your Grace." She hadn't expected him to seek her company for worship. When she opened the door, Alistair stood tall in a well-worn but immaculate black coat. His gentle smile showed. "No mockery. The bells will ring soon, shall we?" The morning air held autumn's crisp bite as they walked side by side down the muddy street. Mary Beth kept her eyes down, all too aware of the whispers and stares following them. But Alistair's steady presence beside her gave her courage she hadn't felt in years. At the church steps, titters and hushed comments rippled through the gathering congregation. Yet Alistair simply offered his arm, guiding her up the worn stone stairs as if she were a duchess herself. Inside the humble wooden sanctuary, he led her to a pew near the front, helping her settle before taking his place beside her. Throughout the service, Mary Beth felt the weight of curious eyes on her back. But whenever she glanced at Alistair, his attention remained fixed forward, his expression serene as he followed along in the shared prayer book between them. After the final hymn, he suggested a walk by the river to enjoy the fine weather. The afternoon sun sparkled on the water as they found a quiet path away from prying eyes. "I sense you have questions about me," Alistair said at last, his voice gentle. "You must wonder why a duke wanders so far from home." Mary Beth nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "In England, I opposed certain powerful landlords who were driving their tenants to ruin through greed." His jaw tightened. "I spoke against them in Parliament, defended farmers in court. For my trouble, I was branded a traitor to my class. Even my title could not shield me from their influence." "You stood up for what was right," Mary Beth said softly. "That shows true nobility." A sad smile touched his lips. "Kind of you to say. But tell me, what occupies your thoughts when not dealing with troublesome dukes?" Mary Beth hesitated then. Admitted, "I love to read. My father's law books especially. He taught me letters before he died, and I've studied his notes ever since. Foolish, I know, for a woman of my station." But Alistair's eyes lit with interest. "Not foolish at all. Knowledge should know no boundaries of birth or gender." As evening approached, they returned to the inn where a cheerful fire burned in the hearth. Other guests had retired early, leaving them alone in the common room's warm glow. Mary Beth gathered her courage and pulled out her father's small Bible. Would you mind if I read aloud? The Psalms always bring me comfort." "I would be honored," Alistair said, settling into a chair nearby. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she read. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The familiar words flowed like honey, filling the quiet room with their ancient comfort. When she finished, she looked up to find Alistair watching her with undisguised admiration, his eyes soft in the firelight. For the first time in years, Mary Beth felt her lips curve in a natural, unguarded smile. The warmth of the flames seemed to reach deep inside her, melting away old hurts and fears. If only for this precious moment. The carriage wheels rattled over the uneven dirt road as Mary Beth and Alistair made their way to her father's land. The deed papers rustled in her lap as each bump jostled them. She kept one hand pressed firmly upon them, as if they might blow away in the morning breeze that swept through the carriage windows. "'Tis just around this bend," Mary Beth said softly. pointing ahead. Her heart squeezed as the familiar rolling hills came into view. The driver pulled the horses to a stop at her direction. Alistair stepped down first, turning to offer his hand. Mary Beth hesitated only a moment before accepting it, his warm grip steady and sure as she descended. The touch lingered a heartbeat longer than strictly proper. "Show me your father's dream," he said gently. Together they walked the boundary of the property, their boots crushing sweet grass beneath. Mary Beth's steps grew more confident as she pointed out the features of the land she knew so well. "See how the stream curves here?" She led him to where clear water bubbled over rocks. "Father always said this could water the whole town if properly channeled. The railroad men want to control all water access, force folks to pay dear for every drop." Alistair crouched down, running his fingers through the cool stream. "Your father was a wise man. This water could indeed sustain many families. The soil here is rich too." Mary Beth knelt beside him, scooping up a handful of dark earth. "Good for growing wheat and vegetables. If the townspeople could farm here instead of relying on railroad shipments, they would be free of the railroads." "Grip," Alistair finished, his eyes warming with understanding. This land could give them independence. The afternoon sun painted long shadows as they explored further. Mary Beth found herself sharing memories at every turn. The apple tree she'd climbed as a girl, the meadow where her mother had gathered wildflowers, the spot where her father had taught her to read his law books. As sunset approached, they made their way to the old barn. Its weathered boards glowed golden in the fading light. Inside, the sweet scent of hay filled the air, stirring more memories. "I remember the harvest dances held here," Mary Beth said wistfully, gazing at the worn floorboards. "Though I never danced myself. Too awkward, too plain." "Nonsense." Alistair's voice was firm but gentle. He stepped closer, extending his hand. "Every lady should know how to waltz." Mary Beth's breath caught. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly ... Alistair," he corrected softly. "Please." With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. His other hand settled at her waist, proper yet intimate. "Small steps," he murmured. "Follow my lead." Slowly, he guided her in the basic pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Her initial stiffness gradually melted away as they moved together in the dust-moted light streaming through the barn's high windows. "You see?" Alistair smiled down at her. "You dance beautifully." Heat bloomed in Mary Beth's cheeks, but for once it wasn't from shame. His eyes held genuine warmth, even ... admiration. The thought made her dizzy. Their steps slowed as darkness crept in. Through the barn's open door, fireflies began to drift and dance, their gentle lights matching the flutter of Mary Beth's heart. Alistair's hand tightened slightly at her waist. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "You are worth more than gold, Mary Beth." The words pierced straight to her heart, setting loose a lifetime of longing. But fear gripped her just as quickly. She pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. How could she believe him? Men had only ever mocked her, used her. Even if his words seemed sincere, how could she trust that this wasn't another cruel joke? The fireflies continued their silent dance outside as she stood trembling, caught between hope and doubt, while Alistair waited patiently in the growing darkness. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like every soul in the county. Mary Beth smoothed her mother's blue silk gown, carefully mended but still elegant, as she waited near the front. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern of tiny flowers embroidered along the bodice, drawing strength from this piece of her past. Whispers filled the stuffy air. Some folks pointed at her, others at Alistair, who sat straight back in the front row. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the golden shafts of light. "Miss Carter," the town clerk called, his voice echoing. "Present your case." Mary Beth rose slowly, clutching the deed papers. Her legs trembled as she walked to the center of the room. She could feel every eye upon her, just as they had been at the auction block. But this time was different. This time, she held truth in her hands. "Good people of Millbrook," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Many of you knew my father. He was a man who believed in justice, in protecting those who worked the land." She unfolded the yellowed papers with careful fingers. "What you may not know is that he left more than memories behind." A few snickers rose from the back. "Aye, he left debts and a spinster daughter," someone called out. Alistair half rose, but Mary Beth lifted her chin higher. "He left a legacy," she declared, her voice growing stronger. "This land grant signed by the territorial governor himself ensures that these acres cannot be sold to any railroad or company without the consent of those who farm it." The room erupted in murmurs. Mary Beth held up the document, its official seal catching the light. "See here, the protection is written plain. The water rights belong to the community, not to whoever has the most gold in their purse." "Let me see." "That," the clerk hurried forward, adjusting his spectacles as he examined the paper. His eyes widened. "She speaks true. This grant has power in law." A cheer went up from the farmers in the crowd. Mary Beth felt warmth spread through her chest, as hope dawned on their faces. But then a harsh voice cut through the celebration. "And what of your foreign duke?" her uncle sneered from his corner. "Buying up our women and our land." "I bought nothing," Alistair's voice rang out as he stood. He moved to stand beside Mary Beth, tall and proud. "I merely prevented a grave injustice. Miss Carter owns herself and her land by right." More voices rose in argument. Mary Beth felt the familiar shame trying to creep back, but this time she pushed it away. Drawing herself up to her full height, she spoke in a voice that carried to every corner. "I will not be bought," she declared, trembling but firm. "I will not be mocked or sold or shamed ever again. I am my father's daughter, and I stand for what is right." The hall fell silent. In that breathless moment, Alistair turned to her. His eyes shone with something she had never dared to name. "My brave, beautiful Mary Beth," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You stand for everything good and true in this world." Then, before the entire assembly, he took her face gently in his hands and kissed her. The kiss was soft, reverent, and over in moments. But in those heartbeats, Mary Beth felt the world shift beneath her feet. Alistair drew back just enough to speak, his voice ringing with conviction. "I love you," he declared. "Not for land or title or any wealth, but for your courage and your heart." Gasps and exclamations filled the hall. Someone began to clap, then another, until the sound thundered off the rafters. But Mary Beth barely heard them. She stood frozen, one hand pressed to her lips, the other still clutching her father's papers. The shame that had weighed her down for so long cracked and fell away like an old shell, leaving her standing taller than she ever had before. Her heart pounded with the enormity of what had just happened, her victory, her declaration, his kiss, his love. She had found her voice at last, and to her amazement, it had been strong and true. The morning sun had barely touched the town's dusty streets when thundering hoofbeats echoed through the square. A rider, his horse lathered with sweat, pulled up hard before the courthouse steps. In his hand, he clutched a leather document case that would soon tear apart everything Mary Beth had come to believe. From her perch near the inn's window, Mary Beth watched as Mr. Henderson, the man who had bid against Alistair at the auction, dismounted with surprising agility for his bulk. His face bore a triumphant smirk as he hurried inside the courthouse, his riding coat flapping behind him. Within the hour, word spread through the town like wildfire. Henderson had produced a deed, yellow with age but bearing what appeared to be her father's signature. The document claimed he had sold the fertile acres years ago, before his death. "It cannot be true," Marybeth whispered, her fingers pressed against the cool window pane. Her father would never have sold their legacy without telling her. Yet doubt, that cruel companion, began to whisper in her ear. The railroad men, smart in their pressed suits, wasted no time. They gathered in clusters outside the general store, their voices carrying just loud enough for passing townspeople to hear. Quite convenient, wouldn't you say? One agent remarked to another. A foreign duke appears from nowhere, purchases the girl at auction, and suddenly there's a question of land rights. Almost as if it were planned, his companion agreed with exaggerated concern. Marybeth's heart seemed to stop as she watched. Faces changed throughout the morning. The same townsfolk who had cheered her courage yesterday now walked past with averted eyes. Some whispered behind raised hands, others shook their heads in apparent pity. She found Alistair in the courthouse, bent over the disputed documents with the sheriff. His noble profile, once so reassuring, now seemed distant and unfamiliar. Had she imagined the warmth in his eyes? The tenderness in his touch during their dance? "Your Grace," she said formally, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. The title felt like ashes in her mouth. "I must speak with you." Alistair turned, his face lighting with relief at seeing her. "Marybeth, thank heaven. These accusations are absolutely— Did you know?" She cut him off, her words sharp as broken glass. "About the land, the water rights, all of it. Before you bid for me at auction?" "I learned of it only when we found your father's chest," he answered, taking a step toward her. "You must believe." "Must I?" Marybeth's voice cracked. "How convenient that a disgraced English duke should appear at precisely the right moment. That you should show such interest in a plain, unmarried woman whom everyone else mocked. That you should discover the deed and suggest marriage so quickly." "No," Alistair protested, reaching for her hand. "You cannot think." She pulled away from his touch as if burned. "I think I have been a fool," she whispered. "A fool to believe someone like you could see worth in someone like me. Was any of it real? Or was I simply the price you had to pay? For the land?" "Marybeth, please," he begged, his refined accent making even his desperation sound elegant. "Everything I feel for you is genuine. I swear on my honor." "Honor?" She laughed bitterly, tears threatening to fall. "What honor is there in purchasing a woman to steal her birthright?" Without waiting for his response, she turned and fled. Her mother's gown, which had made her feel so elegant yesterday, now seemed to mock her with its pretensions. She hurried through the town square, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her passage. In her chamber at the inn, Marybeth's trembling fingers found the single candle by her bedside. The flame that had lit so many moments of hope now seemed to taunt her with its cheerful glow. With a shaking breath, she extinguished it, preferring the darkness that matched her heart. In the shadows, she pressed her hands to her face, finally allowing her tears to fall. How cruel that her first taste of love should turn to such bitter poison. She had dared to believe in fairy tales, in a noble prince who saw beyond her common status and size. Instead, she had received a harsh reminder of what she had always known, that dreams were dangerous things and hope was a luxury she could not afford. The pale light of dawn crept through the lace curtains, finding Marybeth on her knees beside the narrow bed. Her hands were clasped tightly in prayer, her shoulders bent under the weight of confusion and heartache. Outside her window, the morning bustle of the town carried whispers of doubt and speculation. "Lord, guide me," she whispered, her voice catching. "Show me the truth in all this darkness." The floorboards beneath her knees were hard and cold, but she barely noticed the discomfort. Her father's Bible lay open beside her, its pages worn smooth by years of faithful readings. Through the thin walls, she could hear the muttering of townspeople passing by. Their words drifted up like poison. "That Duke. Calculated plan. Poor foolish girl." Each whisper was a thorn in her heart, each doubt a shadow across her faith. In the town hall, Alistair stood before the council, his noble bearing unchanged despite the hostility surrounding him. Sheriff Turner sat at the head of the long table, his weathered face grave as he examined the competing documents. "I implore you, gentlemen," Alistair's voice rang clear and earnest through the chamber. "These accusations are baseless. I knew nothing of the land's value when He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I intervened at the auction." The council members exchanged skeptical glances. One elder cleared his throat. "Your Grace, you must understand our position. The timing is suspicious. And what of Henderson's claim?" Another councilman added. "The signature appears genuine." The sheriff's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "I want to believe you, Your Grace, but these are serious matters affecting the whole town's future." Back in her chamber, Mary Beth sat alone as the sun climbed higher. She had declined the innkeeper's wife's invitation to join the midday meal, preferring solitude with her memories. Her father's face rose in her mind, his kind eyes, his steady hands as he taught her to read the law books, his absolute trust in her judgment. "You have your mother's heart and my head," he used to say, "and that's a combination that will serve you well." But had she served his memory well? Had she let her heart lead her into a trap? The questions circled like autumn leaves in a bitter wing. As evening approached, a gentle knock came at her door. "Miss Carter," the innkeeper's wife called softly. "His Grace requests your presence at supper." Mary Beth's throat tightened. "Please tell His Grace I am indisposed this evening." The words felt like stones dropping from her lips. Through the door, she heard the woman's retreating footsteps, followed by a heavier tread that could only be Alistair's. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of something being placed on the floor. A covered tray, she supposed. "Mary Beth," his voice came, low and pained. "Please, allow me to explain." She pressed her hands to her ears, fighting the urge to run to the door. His footsteps eventually faded away. The next morning brought gray skies and the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones. Mary Beth stood at her window, watching as Alistair's traveling coach was loaded. He appeared below, his traveling cloak dark against the misty morning. The sheriff approached him, and their voices carried up to where she stood. "I ride for London," Alistair announced firmly. "There are records there that will prove the truth. I give you my word as a gentleman. I will return with evidence that cannot be disputed." He turned then, looking up at her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, all the hurt and confusion between them seemed to crystallize into something sharp and painful. "I swear to you," he called up, loud enough for all to hear, "I will prove my heart true." Mary Beth stood motionless as he entered the carriage. The driver cracked his whip, and the wheels began to turn, carrying Alistair away down the muddy road. Through eyes blurred with tears, she watched until the carriage disappeared into the gathering dusk. A warm tear rolled down her cheek, followed by another. The room grew darker as the sun set, but still she stood at the window, one hand pressed against the glass, as if she could reach through it and pull back time itself. The rain fell in heavy sheets across the muddy town square, drumming against the chapel's roof like angry fists. 3 days had passed since Alistair's departure, days that had stretched like years for both him and Mary Beth. Now his horse's hooves splashed through deep puddles as he guided the exhausted animal toward the chapel steps. Water streamed from his sodden clothes as he dismounted. His fine coat, once a mark of his noble status, clung to him like a commoner's rags. Yet there was purpose in his stride as he climbed the wooden steps, his boots leaving wet prints on the weathered boards. Inside the chapel, word of his return spread quickly. Townsfolk hurried through the rain, gathering in the pews, their whispers echoing off the high beams. Mary Beth sat alone in the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to still their trembling. "Good people," Alistair's voice carried clearly through the chapel, though weariness lined his face. I have returned with truth, not gold, to share. He stepped forward, water dripping from his coat onto the wooden floor. I am indeed Duke Alastair of Rolfmere, but my title brings me no pride. In England, I stood against wealthy landowners who sought to steal from honest farmers. For defending the common folk, I was branded a traitor to my class. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Mary Beth's heart quickened as she watched him, seeing not a duke, but a man stripped bare of pretense. You doubt my intentions toward Miss Carter in this town. His voice softened. Let me prove them. From beneath his coat, he drew forth a heavy purse. The leather bag made a solid thump as he set it before the altar. Here is all that remains of my fortune. Every coin I possess. He appended the purse, and gold pieces clattered across the wooden floor, gleaming in the gray light from the windows. Take it, he said firmly. Use it to fight the railroad's legal claims. I offer it freely, knowing it may leave me with nothing but my name. His eyes found Mary Beth's across the chapel. Some things are worth far more than gold. Mary Beth's breath caught in her throat. Memories of her father flooded back, his careful handling of documents, his insistence that she learn to read them properly. Wait, she whispered, then louder. Wait! She rushed from the chapel, heedless of the rain, running to the inn where her father's cedar chest still sat. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the heavy lid, searching through the familiar papers until there, at the very bottom, a folded document she had overlooked before. When she returned, water dripping from her skirts, her eyes shone with purpose. My father was clever, she said, her voice growing stronger as she unfolded the yellowed paper. He knew someone might try to steal this land someday. The townsfolk leaned forward as she read aloud, and be it further declared that these lands, granted in perpetuity to Carter and his heirs, shall never be sold nor transferred to any railroad company or its agents, such attempt at transfer being null and void under law. She looked up, meeting Alastair's gaze. The forged deed claims my father sold to the railroad's agent 5 years ago. But he couldn't have. It was forbidden in the original grant. The chapel erupted in excited chatter. The sheriff stepped forward, examining the document with careful eyes. This proves the forgery, he announced. The railroad's claim is worthless. Cheers filled the chapel, echoing off the rafters. But Mary Beth had eyes only for Alastair, who knelt now before the altar, his head bowed. He looked not like a duke, but like a pilgrim awaiting judgment, as if his very future hung on her next. Words. The rain continued its steady drumming on the chapel roof, but inside, a different sound grew, the sound of a community united, of truth revealed, of trust restored. And in that moment, as Mary Beth clutched her father's papers and watched Alastair's humbled pose, she felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. The church bells rang clear and sweet across the frontier town that Sunday morning, their resonant tones calling the faithful to worship. Golden sunlight streamed through the chapel's windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor as townsfolk filed in, dressed in their finest clothes. The same people who had once jeered at Mary Beth now settled into the pews with reverent anticipation. Sheriff Turner stood at the altar, his usual stern expression softened by the occasion. The special marriage license lay ready in his weathered hands. He had insisted on presiding himself, perhaps to make amends for his initial suspicions of Alastair's intentions. A hush fell over the congregation as the chapel door opened. Mary Beth stood in the doorway, bathed in morning light. She wore a simple cream-colored gown, borrowed from the innkeeper's wife and carefully altered to fit her fuller figure. Her dark hair was adorned with small white flowers gathered from the meadow, and her eyes shone with quiet joy. As she began her walk down the aisle, the townsfolk saw her differently now. Gone was the woman they had mocked on the auction block. In her place stood a lady of quiet dignity, one who had fought for her land and her love with equal determination. Alastair waited at the altar, his noble bearing evident despite his simple attire. His eyes never left Mary Beth as she approached, and those watching saw in his gaze not the calculated interest of a land-grabbing noble, but the pure devotion of a man in love. When Mary Beth reached his side, Alistair took her hand with gentle reverence. Sheriff Turner cleared his throat and began the ceremony, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. "Before God and these witnesses," Alistair spoke clearly, his words ringing with conviction, "I pledge my heart and life to you, Mary Beth. I came to these lands seeking neither property nor position, but found instead a love worth more than all. The estates in England." Mary Beth's voice trembled slightly but grew stronger as she made her own declaration. "I choose you freely, Alistair, not from necessity or obligation, but because my heart recognizes its match in yours. Where others saw only what could be gained, you saw me." The sheriff pronounced them man and wife, and the chapel erupted in genuine cheers. The same voices that had once called out mocking bids now shouted blessings and congratulations. After the ceremony, the newly wedded couple walked together through the fields of what had been her father's estate. The afternoon sun warmed the fertile soil beneath their feet as they discussed their plans for the land. "We will restore these fields first," Mary Beth said, gesturing to where wheat once grew tall. "The town needs its own source of grain, independent from the railroads." "Control." Alistair nodded, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "And here, by the stream, we can build a proper mill. Your father's vision will live on, making this land serve all the people, not just its owners." They walked until sunset, their footsteps in perfect rhythm, their conversations flowing easily between practical plans and tender exchanges. The stream gurgled peacefully beside them as the sky painted itself in shades of pink and gold dot as the last rays of sunlight gilded the water. They stopped at the bend in the stream where Mary Beth had played as a child. Alistair turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You were never meant to be sold for pennies," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "but cherished beyond price." Mary Beth leaned against him, tears of joy trailing down her cheeks. As she smiled, the land stretched out before them, rich with promise, just as their love held the promise of all the days to come. The water sparkled beside them, catching the last light of day as they stood together, no longer duke and farmer's daughter, but simply husband and wife, their hearts as united as their hands. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.